My name is Emily Reisig. I am a licensed professional counselor, which is a fancy way of saying that I have a master's degree and I've gone through a lot of time counseling to get my full license. I am actually a specialist in trauma, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about trauma. So, trauma is one of those things that is spread all over the media. It's something that is also not all that well known. Trauma is very personal. It's something that you yourself would experience, and it's not something that somebody can shove off on you or tell you what you have. People will experience crazy events and not have experienced them as traumatic, and some people will experience what everyday people would call mundane events, and they can be highly traumatic. It goes off the premise that our perception is our reality. So you want to take that into account when you're dealing with trauma yourself. The thing that I am asked often by my patients is, why can't I get over this? Why is this something that I can't shake? It's something that is rocking to me to my core. I'm a person who's always been highly functioning. I've been a very efficient rock star sort of person, and now all of a sudden this isn't working anymore for me. And what happens when you're going through a trauma and when you've gone through a trauma and you're in the aftermath is that your entire world has changed. Trying to reconcile it is incredibly difficult because you don't have any basis for comparison. That's why it is traumatic to you. I myself live in New Jersey, and in New Jersey in the wintertime we have frozen pipes. Sometimes we have floods. I live in an area that actually, my house is not, but there are a lot of areas around me that are prone to flooding. And every once in a while you could actually even envision having a tree fall. But in New Jersey, generally speaking, you're not expecting tornado sirens to go off. You're not expecting your house to be knocked over by an earthquake. So if something were to happen like that, it could be very traumatic because it is not within your worldview. You didn't see it coming. It's not something that you have any basis for comparison. Now, when things go from being stressful to being traumatic is when your brain keeps trying to process it over and over again, and it still can't come up with any kind of reconciling. So the way that I like to talk about the brain and the way that we take in information is that every single day we take in new data. And in our sleep cycle, we process that data. That data gets organized into the appropriate categories. The things that are important stay, and the things that are not important get thrown out. So you might want to remember the person that you met, say at the coffee shop, who had an important message for you or knew somebody, and you may want to forget what you had for lunch. And your brain won't store that information for huge periods of time. And so then what happens is when you've gone through a traumatic event, those things that are not able to be categorized or organized in your brain get kind of thrown into a pile of undigested memories and undigested feelings. And so what happens when we have when we do therapy is we try to bring those forward and reprocess them, talk through them, feel through them with the support of a counselor, and that's why we do it in my practice. I don't recommend you doing it too often on your own, only because you want to have somebody who can ground you and who is experienced in dealing with this sort of thing. So what also happens is there are biological responses to trauma. There are fabulous researchers out there, a woman by the name of Dr. Rebecca Campbell. Amazing work. She's done tons of MRIs and blood work to kind of look at survivors of sexual trauma and what their responses are. But essentially what happens is you have a hormonal response to a trauma, and you have certain hormones that are dumped into your system, and depending on that, you may have a different kind of response. So, people who are very aggressive and amped up after an event that's very traumatizing may still be very aggressive. Those are the people you see on the news who are yelling at the cameras or yelling at everyone around them. Somebody who has more of a sort of a numbing effect, meaning that the hormones dumped into their system are more like a sedative. They are going to be the numbed out people. They're the people you're watching on the news who are just kind of staring off into space, who are not really present. And that just signifies that they had a higher level of that in their system. And then you have people who actually might be giggling. They might be talking lovingly. And in that circumstance, they may have had a higher oxytocin dump in their system. So I talk about that a little bit because I think it's important to explain that there is a biological reason for the things that we have gone through when it's traumatic. Another thing is that your prefrontal cortex turns off. Because your brain basically says system overload, we need to go into full fight or flight, we need to take over the controls here. We can't have your rational decision making part of your brain, jump in here and mess things up. And so there are often times when I talk to survivors who are saying to me, I don't know why I didn't fight. I don't know why I made that decision. It was so silly. What was I thinking? And the reality behind it is that there was biology at play. There are things that you couldn't control. And I think it's important for you to realize that just because you want to control it doesn't mean that you can control it in that aspect. So I really encourage you to go out there and check out some of the research that exists on the biological response to trauma. My specialty really is sexual trauma, which if you're ever looking for something to end a conversation at a party, tell them that you're a sexual assault therapist and people will find a reason to walk away. And that's not because it's shameful and in any way, shape, or form am I upset about the work I do. In fact, I have decided it is life's mission. But it's because people are uncomfortable. People are uncomfortable with their own sexuality. They're uncomfortable with sexuality being something that could be traumatized. And so they themselves are afraid. And this is something you might run into in your therapy over the years, where you would assume that a therapist would want to talk about this or deal with it. And the reality is the therapists oftentimes don't know how to or feel equipped. It feels desperately traumatizing to them, and so they're scared as to how to progress through it. So anyway, I just wanted to get on here and tell you a little bit about this. I will continue to release some videos out there, but I wanted to just take you on sort of a basic course on trauma work. And if you or your loved one has gone through any kind of traumatic event, please check out the resources that are out there. Find yourself a good therapist who is well versed in it, and get yourself some help. There is no shame in it at all. All right, have a lovely day. Take care.